7 days after my wife's funeral, my own son placed my suitcase outside and said, "Dad, this house is no longer yours. You need to leave." I stood there in the rain, believing I had lost everything, until an old boat dock owner pulled up and whispered, "Your wife left me one instruction. If she didn't return, I had to find you." Minutes later, I opened a forgotten boathouse hidden by the lake. What I discovered inside made me question everything I knew about my family. Before we begin, I'm so grateful you're here watching Revenge Dad with me today. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your city, your country. I love knowing who's in this community. Like and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. This story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the message it carries is one worth keeping. The morning we buried Helen, I made 2 cups of coffee. I did not realize what I had done until both mugs were already on the counter, steam rising from each one, the smell of dark roast moving through the kitchen, the way it had moved through this house every single morning for 35 years. I stood there staring at the second cup, and my legs stopped working. Not from weakness, from the particular shock of a body that has done something so automatic, so deeply trained, that it forgot the reason no longer existed. I poured 1 cup out. I left the other on the counter and went to get dressed for the funeral. Forest Lawn Cemetery in Glendale sits against the hills northeast of Los Angeles. And on the morning we buried Helen, the marine layer had come in thick off the Pacific, and the sky was the color of old concrete. It almost never rains in Southern California in September. That morning, it rained. Softly, steadily, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself, but simply arrives and stays. Terrence stood to my left at the graveside. My son was 38 years old and brilliant in the specific way of people who can hold an entire engineering system inside their head simultaneously. And on that morning, he looked like a man whose mind had simply refused to process any more information. He gripped a folded program in both hands so tightly the paper had gone soft from moisture, and he stared at the casket with the expression of someone waiting for a correction that was not coming. Savannah stood on his other side, tailored black dress pearl earrings posture that belonged in a boardroom rather than a cemetery. Her hand rested on Terrence's arm with the practiced weight of performed comfort, but her eyes kept sliding away from the grave, drifting toward the parking lot, toward the line of cars along the access road, toward something beyond the immediate moment that apparently required her attention more than her mother-in-law's burial did. I heard her before she moved away. Her phone was already at her ear. "Tell him Thursday," she said, stepping back from the graveside, one hand shielding her hair from the rain. "I'll have the projections ready by Wednesday evening. Just tell him to hold." Terrence did not seem to hear her. He was still staring at the fresh earth. I watched Savannah end her call, smooth her hair, and return to her husband's side with the fluid ease of someone resuming a role rather than returning to a person. She slipped her arm through his. She said something to him in a low voice. He nodded without looking at her. Something moved in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. It was quieter than grief, sharper than grief, the particular cold sensation I had learned over 30 years of federal work to pay attention to, when it arrived without explanation. Helen used to say, "When your gut tightens for no reason, that's not no reason." I had agreed with that saying for 35 years without ever truly needing it. Standing at her grave watching my daughter-in-law manage her schedule in the rain, I understood for the first time that Helen had not been speaking in abstractions. My gut was tight. It had been tight since the moment we arrived at the cemetery, and I did not yet know why. But I had spent a career learning that not knowing why is not the same as there being no reason. The service ended, the rain continued. I stayed until everyone else had gone. Helen once told me that grief has a shape, not a color, not a sound, a shape like something large and edgeless that you carry inside your chest, something you cannot get a proper grip on, no matter how many times you try to reposition it. 7 days after we buried her, I was beginning to understand precisely what she had meant. I had been waking before 5 every morning, before the birds, before the automatic sprinklers on the lawns up and down Mariposa Avenue clicked on in the dark. I would lie there on my side of the bed, just my side now, the other side undisturbed and impossibly loud in its stillness, and I would stare at the ceiling until I could justify getting up. Then I would make 1 cup of coffee, sit at the kitchen table, and wait for the morning light to come through the window above the sink. Some mornings it felt like an achievement just to get that far. On the seventh morning, I heard the front door open at 8 o'clock. I had not given Savannah a key, but Terrence had given her his, and what belonged to Terrence apparently belonged to Savannah, and nobody had thought to ask me how I felt about that particular arrangement. She came into the kitchen the way she entered most rooms, with forward momentum, and the look of someone whose time is already allocated elsewhere. She was wearing a pale gray blazer and dark slacks, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, dressed not for a condolence visit, but for a transaction. She set the portfolio on the kitchen table, Helen's table, the one we had eaten 32 years of meals at together, and sat down without waiting to be invited. "Good morning, Walter," she said, warm, careful, the kind of warmth that has been engineered rather than felt. "I know the timing isn't ideal, but there are things that genuinely can't wait." I looked at her over my coffee mug and said nothing that I was actually thinking. She opened the portfolio and slid a thick document across the table toward me. 40 pages, maybe more, clipped at the corner, the product of serious legal billing hours. She explained it calmly. Terrence had used the Pasadena house as collateral for a bridge loan months ago, a temporary measure to keep Brooks Medical Technologies from going under. The loan terms had now triggered a review window. The bank needed my signature on the authorization pages by Monday, or proceedings to reclassify the property would begin. Forced sale. Her voice made it sound like a weather report, unfortunate but impersonal, simply how things were. I picked up the document. Helen's voice came into my head immediately clear and firm, the way it always was when she was serious. "Don't ever sign anything when you're grieving. That's when people come for you." I read the way 30 years of federal investigation had trained me to read not for the surface, but for what the surface is covering. Page 3, page 7, page 12. On page 19, I found Terrence's signature, his looping capital, T, his abbreviated last name. Familiar, expected. On page 23, I found mine. I stopped breathing for exactly 1 second. Walter D. Brooks, my full middle initial. The correct letter count. The precise forward slant of my capital W, the idiosyncratic angle I had developed in my 20s, and never changed. Every detail reproduced with the patience of someone who had studied the original carefully and taken their time. I had never signed page 23. I had never been shown this document. I had never been present in any room where a conversation about my house being used as loan collateral had taken place. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had done it well. I set the document down on the table without changing my expression. That particular skill, keeping my face completely neutral while my mind is moving at full speed, was the most useful thing 30 years of federal work had given me. Terrence appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. Unshaven sweatshirt from the night before, eyes swollen and red at the rims. He looked at the floor when I looked at him, which told me everything about how much he actually understood of what Savannah had brought into this kitchen. "Did you read it before you signed?" I asked him. He rubbed the back of his neck, the same gesture he had used at 12 when he broke a neighbor's window with a baseball and came home hoping I wouldn't find out. "Savannah explained it," he said quietly. I trusted her. I looked at my son standing in the kitchen doorway of the house his mother had loved for 32 years. Then I asked him one question. "If Helen were standing in this kitchen right now, do you think she would want us to sign this today?" Terrence's chin came up fast. His eyes flooded red in an instant, the color rushing in the way it does when a man is fighting very hard to hold himself together and losing the fight. His throat worked. His mouth opened and closed without producing a single word. He could not answer me. That was the only answer I needed. I stood up, carried my mug to the sink, rinsed it, and set it in the drying rack. I told Savannah I needed more time to review the document. She pushed back. I told her again. Then I looked out the window at the pepper trees Helen had loved, and I stayed looking at them until I heard her gather her portfolio and leave. I was going to need more than time. I just didn't know yet exactly what I was going to need. 2 days after Savannah laid that document on my kitchen table, I packed 2 suitcases. Not because I had decided to leave. I want to be clear about that. I packed because on the morning of the 9th day, I came downstairs to find my 2 largest suitcases already sitting beside the front door. Someone had pulled them from the hall closet and set them there, upright handles extended, ready to be rolled out. Neither Terrence nor Savannah was in the room, but the message required no translation. Terrence appeared from the kitchen a few minutes later, hands in his pockets, shoulders curved inward the way they get when he is carrying something he doesn't want to carry. He looked at the suitcases. Then he looked at me. "Dad," he said. And then he stopped because whatever he had planned to say next wouldn't come. Savannah stepped in from the hallway behind him. She had her coat on and her keys in her hand. She looked at me with the measured calm of someone who has rehearsed this moment. "Walter," she said, "this house is no longer yours. You need to leave." Outside, the sky had gone the color of old concrete. A thin rain had started, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that simply arrives and settles in, indifferent to the plans of the people standing underneath it. I looked at Terrence. He looked at the floor. I picked up both suitcases and walked to the front door. I did not yell at him. I wanted to. The anger rose up through my chest so fast and so hot that I had to press my back teeth together to keep it from coming out of my mouth as something I couldn't take back. Instead, I turned around, pulled my two largest suitcases out of the closet, and began to pack. Terrence stood in the doorway watching me fold shirts. "Dad, Go downstairs, Terrence," I said. "Please." He went. I packed methodically, closed documents, the photograph of Helen and me on the coast at Big Sur that had sat on my nightstand for 12 years. I did not take the second coffee mug from the kitchen cabinet. I thought about it. I left it where it was. Savannah was waiting in the living room when I came downstairs with both suitcases. She had her coat on and her car keys in her hand, and she gave me the same careful practice smile she had given me at the cemetery. "I think this is for the best," she said. "Really, Walter, you'll have people around you, support. You shouldn't be alone in a house this size." I looked at her for a moment. Something had shifted in me over the past 2 days. Some internal gauge had moved from uncertainty into a territory I recognized from my working years. It was the particular stillness that settles over you when you stop trying to figure out if something is wrong and accept that it is, and begin instead to figure out what you're going to do about it. "Thank you for your concern," I said. I picked up my suitcases and walked out the front door. The morning was cool and bright, the San Gabriel Mountains sharp against the sky, the way they only get after rain. I set the suitcases down on the porch steps and stood for a moment, looking at the pepper trees Helen had loved. The light was coming through them at a low angle, the way it does in October, casting long shadows across the front lawn. I heard a vehicle slow at the curb. It was an old pickup truck, the kind that has been repainted at least once and still shows the ghost of the original color underneath. The man who climbed out was about my age, maybe a year or two older, with a wide chest and the unhurried movements of someone who has spent most of his life working outdoors. He wore a flannel shirt and work boots, and he was holding something in his right hand, a photograph. He stopped on the sidewalk and looked at the photo, then looked at me, then back at the photo. "You Walter Brooks?" he asked. His voice was the kind of voice that belongs to men who don't waste words, low, flat, direct. "I am," I said. He walked up the path and extended the photograph toward me. I took it. It was a photo of me taken maybe 3 or 4 years ago at a backyard barbecue. Helen must have given it to him. I looked at it for a moment, then looked back at the man. "My name is Frank Dawson," he said. "I run a marina down in Marina del Rey. Your wife came to see me about 14 months ago." He paused, choosing his next words carefully, the way careful men do. "She made an arrangement, asked me to find you if she didn't come back within 30 days of a date she gave me." He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, which he handed over without ceremony. "That date passed 6 days ago." I unfolded the paper. It was Helen's handwriting. I would have known it anywhere, the neat, slightly forward-leaning cursive she had used for 35 years, of lesson plans and grocery lists and birthday cards. A date, an address in Marina del Rey, a name, Frank Dawson. And below that, in letters slightly larger than the rest, Walter only. Not Terrence. My throat tightened so fast it felt like a fist closing around it. I read the last 2 words again. Not Terrence. Helen had known. Whatever she had known it well enough to specify that Terrence could not be part of this. She had planned this before she died. She had planned it carefully, quietly, without telling me the way she did everything she considered truly important. "She told me not to call ahead," Frank said. He was watching me with an expression that was not pity and not curiosity, but something quieter than both, the expression of a man who understands that some things require witness rather than comment. "Said to come in person. Said you'd understand why." I folded the paper and put it in my jacket pocket. Behind me, I could hear Savannah's heels on the hardwood floor of the front hallway, moving toward the door. I picked up both suitcases. "Mr. Dawson." I said, "Do you have room in that truck?" For the first time, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like recognition. "Already got the passenger seat cleared," he said. Frank Dawson drove the way he talked, without wasted movement, without unnecessary noise. We took the 110 south out of Pasadena and merged onto the freeway as the morning commute was thinning out. The city opening up around us, the downtown skyline sliding past on the left. Frank kept both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and for the first 10 minutes, neither of us said anything. It was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two men who understood that some situations don't require filling up with words. I was the one who finally spoke. "How did she find you?" I asked. Frank thought about it for a moment before he answered the way a man does when he wants to give you the accurate version rather than the convenient one. "She walked in off the street," he said. 14 months ago, maybe a little more. Said she needed to rent a space at the dock. Private, long-term. He paused. She paid 14 months up front, cash. I asked her what she needed the space for, and she said she needed somewhere to keep things that she couldn't keep at home. She never drove herself, Frank added. Always came by car service. The last 2 times she needed help getting the boxes inside. I carried them for her. She didn't ask me to. I just did it. He kept his eyes on the road. She thanked me both times, like I had done something remarkable. I hadn't. I had just carried some boxes. "And you didn't ask more than that?" Frank was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "My brother lost his house 10 years ago. Dispute with his kids after his wife passed. The lawyers got involved, and by the time it was over, there was nothing left to fight about." He kept his eyes on the road. When a woman in her condition comes to you and pays cash and asks you to keep a secret, you don't ask her to explain herself. You just say yes. I looked out the passenger window at the freeway lanes spreading out beside us, the palm trees along the median, the billboard advertisements for personal injury attorneys and hospital systems and luxury apartments that nobody who worked a regular job could afford. I thought about Helen making this drive alone 14 months ago, already sick, already planning. She had not told me. For 14 months, she had carried this by herself. My chest ached with it, not anger, not quite grief, but something that sat between the two and was heavier than either. We exited at Admiralty Way and wound through the streets of Marina del Rey as the neighborhood shifted from commercial to residential to the particular quiet of waterfront property on a weekday morning. Frank pulled off onto a side road I would not have noticed on my own and followed it down to a small private marina tucked behind a larger public facility. The kind of place that doesn't advertise. He parked and we walked down a wooden dock that creaked under our feet. The air smelled of salt and diesel, and something else, tar maybe, or old rope, the smell of things that have been near the water for a long time. At the end of the dock, past 3 or 4 covered boat slips, was a structure I might have mistaken for a storage unit if I hadn't known to look for it. It was small, corrugated metal roof gone pale with rust at the seams. 2 locks on the door, both heavy gauge. On the face of the lower lock, someone had written 2 initials in whiteout pen, the letters slightly uneven, WB, Helen's handwriting. I knew it without question. Frank produced a keyring from his jacket pocket and held it out to me. "Both keys are on there," he said. "She wanted you to open it yourself." I took the ring. My fingers felt clumsy around it, which was unusual for me. I have steady hands. 30 years of field work will either give you steady hands or take them from you entirely, and I had come through on the right side of that equation. But standing in front of a door my wife had sealed with her own handwriting, I could feel the tremor working its way up from somewhere deep in my forearms. I got the first lock open, then the second. The door swung inward on hinges that needed oil, a long groaning sound that echoed off the water. I reached inside and found a light switch. Fluorescent tubes flickered on one after another, casting a pale flat light across the interior. There was no boat inside. There was a wooden table, surface-scarred and practical. A steel filing cabinet painted green, the kind you find in government surplus sales. An old laptop cord coiled neatly beside it. And arranged along the back wall, stacked 2 high, and labeled on the ends with masking tape and black marker, were 12 cardboard boxes. Each box had a date range written on the tape. The earliest started 11 months ago. The most recent ended 3 weeks before Helen died. On the table in the center was a manila envelope with my name written on the front in her handwriting. Not Walter, not Honey. My full name, Walter D. Brooks. The way she only wrote it when something mattered. I heard Frank's footsteps on the dock behind me moving away, giving me the room. I did not call after him. I sat down in the single chair at the table. I opened the envelope. Inside was a USB drive no larger than my thumb with a small piece of tape on it that said, "Play first." I plugged it into the laptop. The machine took a moment to wake up. Then a video window opened. Helen appeared on the screen. She was sitting in this same chair, at the same table, in this same flat fluorescent light. She was wearing the blue cardigan she had owned for years, the one with the loose button on the left cuff that she kept meaning to fix and never did. Her hair was thinner than I remembered it from even a few months before the end, and her face was pale in the way that the illness had made it, pale not washed out, but somehow more essential, more distilled, like everything unnecessary had been quietly removed. But her eyes were clear. Her voice when she began to speak was steady. "Walter," she said, "if you're watching this, it means Frank found you, which means I didn't make it." She stopped for a moment, collected herself, continued. "I need to start by telling you I'm sorry. I kept this from you for over a year, and I know that's not nothing, but I need you to understand why." I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes hard enough to hurt. I was not going to cry. I needed to hear every word. "If I had told you what I suspected," Helen said, "you would have acted immediately. You would have gone to Terrence, and Savannah would have known within 24 hours that someone was looking. Everything in those boxes would have disappeared before you could touch a single page." She paused. "I needed you to have the full picture first. I needed the picture to be complete before you walked into the room. That's why I did it this way. Not because I didn't trust you, because I trusted you completely enough to know that I had to protect you from your own instincts until the time was right." My throat was burning. I kept my hands where they were. "I don't want revenge, Walter," she said quietly. "I want you to find the truth. And if there's still time, I want you to protect our son." The video ended. The screen went dark. I sat in the chair for a long time without moving. Then I reached out, pulled the nearest cardboard box toward me, and opened it. I spent 3 days in that boat shed without leaving. Frank brought me food twice, a brown bag each time left outside the door, without knocking. The way a person delivers something to someone they understand needs to be left alone. A sandwich, an apple, a bottle of water. Simple things. I ate without tasting any of it. Helen had organized everything the way she organized her classroom for 30 years, by date, by category, by relevance. The earliest box covered the first signs of what she had noticed. Printed email exchanges, handwritten notes in the margins, a single photograph of Savannah, and a man I didn't yet recognize having lunch at a restaurant in Beverly Hills. Helen had written the date below the photograph in blue ballpoint. Then, in parentheses, same week, Terrence signed the first transfer document. She had been watching. While the chemotherapy was stripping her down to the bone, while I was driving her to Cedars-Sinai 3 times a week, and sitting in waiting rooms reading 6-month-old magazines she had been watching and recording and building something. By the end of the second day, I had spread 12 separate sheets of paper across the table and connected them with pencil lines. It looked like something from my OIG days, the kind of diagram we used to tape to the wall of a conference room when a case was too large to hold in one person's head. 3 companies kept appearing in Helen's records: Apex Advisory, LLC, Summit Consulting Group, Pacific Bridge Partners. All 3 had received payments from Brooks Medical Technologies, Terrence's company, over the previous 18 months. The payment descriptions were vague: consulting services, strategic advisory, market development. The kind of language that sounds like something until you look at it carefully, at which point it sounds like nothing at all. None of the 3 companies had a functional website. None had a listed phone number. All 3 had been paid combined just under $1 million. I knew what that pattern meant. I had seen it 100 times across 30 years of federal work. On the morning of the 3rd day, I picked up my phone and called Michael Grant. Michael had been the company attorney for Brooks Medical Technologies for 4 years. Helen's notes mentioned him twice, both times with a single phrase beside his name. "Seems uneasy, won't say why." He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Walter?" His voice was careful, measured. The voice of a man who had been expecting a call he wasn't sure he wanted to receive. "I heard you left the house. Are you all right? I'm fine, I said. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. A pause. Okay. The payments to Apex Advisory Summit Consulting and Pacific Bridge Partners. You've seen those on the books. The pause this time was longer. I could hear him breathing. Walter, I have to be careful about what Michael, I kept my voice level. I'm not asking you to violate privilege. I'm asking you whether you've seen those names before and whether they concerned you. Another pause, then quietly, yes, to both. Why didn't you say something? Because every time I raised a question about vendor payments, Savannah had an answer ready. Documentation, invoices, sign-off sheets. He stopped. And because Terrence told me to trust her judgment on the business side. He said she had the relationships, she knew the market. His voice tightened with something that sounded like it had been building for a long time. I should have pushed harder, I know that. She fired Carol Simmons, I said. The week after Carol asked about the Apex payments. Yes. He exhaled hard. Walter, what are you doing? Where are you? Somewhere safe, I said. I need to ask you one more thing, and it's important. If someone were to have a conversation in person at a location they leased and controlled, and that conversation was recorded, and the person doing the recording was a participant in the conversation themselves, not a third party, would that hold up? Michael was quiet for a moment. I could almost hear him thinking it through. In California, the wiretapping statute, Penal Code Section 632, requires the consent of all parties when it comes to phone calls and electronic communications. But an in-person conversation recorded by a participant in a private space that participant controls, he paused. There's case law supporting that. It's not bulletproof, but it's defensible. Why? Because I think someone is going to come to me soon, I said. And I think when they do, they're going to say things they believe I'm too old and too broken to use against them. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Walter, how bad is it? I looked at the 12 sheets of paper spread across the table. The pencil lines connecting them, the amounts, the dates, the name that appeared at the center of almost every connection. Not Savannah's name, not yet, but a name I was beginning to recognize. A company called Callaway Capital Ventures, a man named Preston Callaway. It's bad, I said, but I think Helen knew exactly how bad it was, and she left me everything I need to prove it. Tell me what you have, Michael said. His voice had changed, the caution was still there, but underneath it something else had surfaced, something that sounded like the long-delayed relief of a man who had been waiting for permission to do the right thing. Tell me everything. I pulled the nearest sheet of paper toward me and started at the beginning. There is a saying in federal investigations that I repeated so many times over 30 years, it stopped sounding like wisdom and started sounding like weather, just a fact of the atmosphere present and inevitable. Follow the registration, not the money lies. Paperwork eventually tells the truth. I had said it to a lot of young agents over the years. I had said it to David Mercer specifically in the hallway outside a conference room in Washington, D.C. in 1999 when he was 23 years old and 3 months into his first major case and completely convinced he was looking in the wrong direction. He had been right about the direction. He had been wrong about what to look at. I called him on the morning of the 13th day. He picked up on the first ring. No greeting, no preamble. Just, tell me what you have. That was David. 27 years, and he still answered the phone the same way. Corporate registrations, I said. 3 companies, California-based, or at least California registered. I need to know who's behind them. Names, Apex Advisory, LLC, Summit Consulting Group, Pacific Bridge Partners. I heard the sound of a keyboard. David was already working. Give me a few hours, he said. I'll call you back. He called back in 4. David Mercer had left the OIG 6 years ago to run his own fraud investigation practice out of a one-room office in Culver City. He worked alone, kept his overhead low, and charged rates that reflected 30 years of knowing exactly where to look. He did not have subpoena power. He did not need it. The California Secretary of State's business registration database is a public record available to anyone with a laptop and enough patience to navigate the search interface. The L.A. County Assessor's property records are public. UCC financing statements. The documents filed when someone uses an asset as collateral for a loan are public. Most people don't know how much you can learn about a person without ever touching anything that isn't already available to the general public. David knew. All three companies registered at the same address, he said when he called back. Commercial mail receiving service in Burbank. The kind of place that rents you a suite number and forwards your mail. No physical office, no employees on record, no state business license beyond the initial filing. Registered agent, Kyle Calloway, age 34. No prior business history, no professional licenses, no online presence worth mentioning. A pause. Mean anything to you? I looked at the diagram spread across the table in front of me. Calloway Capital Ventures, Preston Calloway. I picked up the pencil and wrote the new name beneath Preston's, then drew a line connecting them. He's Preston Calloway's brother, I said. That's what I figured, David said. Preston's got a Calloway Capital Ventures registered in Delaware operating in California. His brother Kyle is the registered agent on all three shell companies. The payment trail from Brooks Medical Technologies to those three companies totals just under $930,000 over 18 months, based on the invoice records you sent me and the solvency filings the company made with the state. $930,000. I said the number quietly to myself in the boat shed, where Helen had spent 14 months building the case that was now spread across my table. There's more, David said. His voice had the particular flat quality it gets when the information he's about to deliver is worse than what came before. I pulled the LA County property transfer records for the past 2 years. There are 2 real estate transactions I think you need to know about. A condominium in Santa Monica, purchase price $680,000. Closed escrow 8 months ago. Title is held in the names of James Cole and Barbara Cole. I set down the pencil. James and Barbara Cole were Savannah's parents. I had met them twice, once at the wedding, once at a Christmas gathering 3 years ago. They had been polite in the distant way of people who have decided in advance that you are not their kind. James Cole had shaken my hand with 2 fingers and spent the evening discussing golf handicaps with Terrence's former college roommate. Barbara had complimented Helen's sweater in a tone that suggested she found it educational. They bought a $680,000 condo in Santa Monica, I said. 8 months ago, cash transaction, no mortgage recorded. David let that land. James Cole is a retired insurance adjuster. Barbara taught elementary school. Their combined pension income based on their Social Security filings and the retirement records that are part of the public court record from a 2019 civil dispute. And I want to be clear that I'm only looking at what's publicly available. David. Right, their combined income wouldn't support that purchase, not without a significant outside source. I looked at the diagram, $930,000 out of Terrence's company, a $680,000 cash purchase by Savannah's parents, a chain of shell companies controlled by the brother of the man who was sleeping with my daughter-in-law. Preston used the patent transfer contract to borrow against it, I said. It wasn't a question, it was the piece I had been working toward since I opened the first box. He filed it as a secured asset before the transfer was legally complete. $5 million, David said. UCC filing with Pacific Fidelity Bank in Century City. The collateral is listed as the exclusive licensing rights to a cardiac support device developed by Brooks Medical Technologies. The filing date is 4 months ago. Another pause. If that transfer was authorized without proper board approval or the correct officer signatures, it wasn't, I said. I'm certain of it. Then someone borrowed $5 million against an asset they didn't legally own. David's voice was careful, precise, the voice of a man building a wall 1 brick at a time. That's bank fraud, Walter. Federal, 18 U.S. Code, Section 1344. Up to 30 years. I stood up from the chair. My knees ached. I walked to the small window at the side of the boat shed and looked out at the dock at the gray-green water of Marina del Rey, moving in slow swells beneath the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, Savannah was going about her day. Preston Calloway was going about his. Terrence was sitting in his office, not sleeping, not eating, watching his company bleed out and blaming himself for the wound. James and Barbara Cole were living in a condo in Santa Monica that had been paid for with my son's money. There's one more thing I need, I said. Carol Simmons. She was the CFO at Brooks Medical until Savannah had her fired. I need to find her. Why? Because Helen's notes say Carol asked questions about the Apex advisory payments and was let go the following week, I said. In my experience, people who get fired for asking the right questions usually kept the receipts. David was quiet for a moment. Then, "Give me until tomorrow morning?" "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Thank me when this is over." I hung up and looked back at the diagram on the table. $930,000, $5 million in fraudulent collateral, a condo purchased with cash, a brother running 3 empty companies from a mail drop in Burbank. Helen had seen all of this coming. She had seen it while she was sick, while she was afraid, while she was trying to hold our family together with both hands and not enough time. I picked up the pencil and wrote one more name on the diagram, drawing a circle around it. Kyle Calloway. Then I drew a line from Kyle to Preston, and another from Preston to Savannah, and another from Savannah to Terrence. And I looked at what I had made and felt the old familiar cold settle over me. Not anger, not grief, but the particular clarity of a man who can finally see the whole shape of the thing he has been trying to understand. I didn't call ahead. In 30 years of federal investigations, I learned that a phone call gives a person time to decide what version of themselves they want to present. Show up in person, and you get the real one, the unedited version, the one that hasn't had time to rehearse. David had tracked Carol Simmons to an apartment complex off Overland Avenue in Culver City. He texted me her address, her vehicle, a silver Honda Civic 2019 partial plate, and the name of the Ralph's supermarket 3 blocks from her building, where her credit card had been used 4 times in the past 2 weeks. I parked in the Ralph's lot at 2 in the afternoon and waited. She came out at 3:15, pushing a cart with 2 bags in it. She was a compact woman in her late 40s, wearing a fleece jacket and running shoes, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had the slightly distracted look of someone going through the motions of ordinary life while carrying something heavier in the background. I got out of my car and walked toward her as she reached the trunk of the silver Civic. "Ms. Simmons," I said. She turned fast, one hand going to her cart, startled the way people are when a stranger knows their name in a parking lot. She looked at me, older man, plain clothes, no particular threat, and the alarm in her face dropped down to wariness. "I don't know you," she said. "No, you don't," I said. "My name is Walter Brooks. Terrence Brooks is my son. Helen Brooks was my wife." Something moved across her face. Not recognition of me, recognition of weight. Like I had named something she had been trying not to think about. Her grip on the cart tightened. "Helen called me," she said. It came out quietly, almost to herself. "About 3 weeks before she passed. She said she hoped I was doing okay. Asked about my daughter." She stopped. Her jaw worked for a moment. I didn't understand why she called. I do now. "Can we talk?" I said. "Not here. Somewhere you're comfortable." She studied me for a long moment. I did not push. I had learned a long time ago that pushing is the fastest way to lose the person you need most. You have to give them the room to arrive at their own decision, and you have to be patient enough to wait while they get there. "My car," she said finally. "We can sit in my car." We sat in the front seats of the silver Civic with the engine off and the windows fogging slightly from the cold. Carol kept her hands in her lap, fingers interlaced, knuckles pale. She was holding herself together with visible effort, the kind of effort that becomes visible only when you're looking for it. "I signed a non-disclosure agreement when they let me go," she said. "My lawyer told me not to discuss anything related to my time at Brooks Medical." "I understand," I said. "I want to explain something to you about that agreement, and I want to be clear that I'm not a practicing attorney, but I spent 30 years as a federal investigator with the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Justice." I said it quietly, without drama. When a non-disclosure agreement is signed in a situation that later becomes the subject of a federal criminal investigation, that agreement loses its enforceability as to the criminal conduct. Under 18 U.S. Code, Section 1512, it is actually a federal offense to use an NDA to obstruct a legitimate investigation. I paused. That means the NDA cannot legally prevent you from cooperating with investigators. It was never meant to. Carol's knuckles loosened slightly. She looked out the windshield at the parking lot. A woman pushed a stroller past the front of the car, a toddler pointing at a pigeon on the asphalt. "She made me adjust the vendor classifications," Carol said. "Savannah. She came to me 3 months after I started and told me the payments to those consulting firms needed to be categorized differently. She said the original codes I had used would trigger a flag in the quarterly review, and that the founders didn't want unnecessary scrutiny on development costs." Her voice was precise, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this internally many times without anyone to say it to. I told her I couldn't reclassify payments without documentation showing the basis for the change. She said she would get me the documentation. She never did. She just asked again and again. What did you do? I refused. The third time she asked, I put it in writing. An email to her copied to the company's general record address. She paused. I was fired the following Friday. HR told me it was a restructuring. There was no restructuring. The email, I said. Do you still have it? Carol was quiet for a moment. Her hands moved in her lap, fingers unlacing and relacing. Then she said, when they asked me to hand back my work laptop, I had already backed up my personal files to my own external drive. I had the right to do that, anything I had created or received in the normal course of my job that was relevant to my own performance record. My employment attorney confirmed it before I surrendered the device. She reached into the back seat without looking and picked up a tote bag from the floor. She set it on her lap, opened it, and took out a small black external hard drive. She held it in both hands for a moment, looking down at it, and I watched something pass across her face, relief maybe, or the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding something for too long. 3 months of ledgers, she said. Every payment to those 3 consulting firms with the original coding I assigned and the date Savannah asked me to change them. The email thread where I refused, the Friday I got my termination notice. She looked up at me. Her eyes were bright with the effort of not crying the shine of tears that hadn't quite decided whether to fall yet. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I didn't know if anyone was ever going to ask. Someone's asking, I said. She pressed her lips together hard. Her chin trembled once quickly before she got it under control. Then she held the hard drive out to me, across the center console. I took it with both hands. It weighed almost nothing, a rectangle of black plastic barely larger than a deck of cards. But Carol Simmons had been fired to prevent what was on it from existing, and that made it the most significant object I had been handed since I walked through the door of the boat shed at Dock 7. Helen called to check on me, Carol said softly. She didn't even know me, not really. We met twice at company events, but she called. I looked at the hard drive in my hands. That was Helen, I said. She didn't let go of people. Carol's breath caught. She turned her face toward the window, fast pressing the back of her hand against her mouth, and her shoulders shook twice before she steadied herself. When she turned back, her eyes were red and wet at the corners, but her voice was even. What happens now? She asked. Now you keep doing exactly what you've been doing, I said. You go home, you live your life. If federal investigators contact you, you cooperate fully, and you tell them exactly what you told me. I put the hard drive in my jacket pocket. And you don't mention this conversation to anyone until I tell you it's time. She nodded. Her hands were still trembling slightly in her lap, the fine tremor of a person returning to solid ground after too long without it. I thanked her and got out of the car. Walking back across the Ralph's parking lot with the hard drive in my pocket, I thought about Helen making a phone call to a woman she barely knew 3 weeks before she died, just to ask if she was doing okay. No agenda, no setup. Just checking on a person who had done the right thing and paid for it. That was the most complete description of my wife I could offer anyone. She didn't let go of people. I got in my car and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Then I started the engine and headed back to Marina del Rey. Helen hated hospitals. Not the way most people hate hospitals. Not the smell or the waiting or the particular institutional coldness of the furniture. She hated them because she said they made her feel like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. She used to joke about it on the drives to Cedars-Sinai, sitting in the passenger seat, with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the road, saying things like, I keep telling them my name is Helen, and they keep calling me the patient in room 4, and if one more person asks me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to rate their question a 0. She made those jokes all the way to the end, even when the jokes cost her something to make. I thought about that on the drive to Beverly Hills the following morning, the way she used humor, the way some people use a flashlight in a dark room, not to pretend the dark isn't there, but to make sure she knew exactly what she was walking through. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center sits on the east side of Beverly Hills, where the neighborhood transitions from residential to medical, a campus of interconnected buildings, behind a valet stand and a low concrete wall. I had spent more hours in its waiting rooms than I could count over the previous 14 months. I knew which elevator was fastest and which coffee from the lobby cart was worth buying and which wasn't. I had called ahead this time. Dr. Raymond Osei had been Helen's primary oncologist for the final 8 months of her treatment. He was a careful man, methodical, precise, the kind of physician who explained things in complete sentences and did not traffic in false comfort. Helen had trusted him. That was not a small thing. Helen did not trust easily. His assistant brought me back to his office at 10 in the morning. It was a small room with a window overlooking an interior courtyard, shelves of medical texts along one wall, a framed photograph on the desk of a man, and 2 children at what looked like a lakeside campsite. Dr. Osei stood when I came in, shook my hand firmly, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I'm very sorry about Helen. She was an exceptional patient and an exceptional person." "Thank you," I said. "She thought highly of you." He sat. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the unhurried manner of someone who has learned to be present in difficult rooms. "How can I help you today?" "I have a question about her appointment record," I said, "and I want to be straightforward with you about why I'm asking." He folded his hands on the desk. "Please." "Helen missed 2 appointments during her treatment. I'd like to know the circumstances." Dr. Osei's expression shifted, not alarm exactly, but a kind of heightened attention, the look of a man whose professional instincts have registered something. He turned to his computer and typed for a moment. "August 14th, he said, "and October 2nd. He read from the screen, his voice level. Both appointments were canceled by phone. The notes indicate the caller identified herself as the patient. What time were those calls made? More typing. August 14th, the cancellation came in at 8:52 in the morning, October 2nd at 9:17. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of paper, the page from Helen's notes where she had recorded her own schedule written in her careful cursive hand. I unfolded it and set it on the desk facing him. On August 14th, I said, Helen had a 7:30 appointment at the Kaiser Permanente facility in Woodland Hills for a concurrent imaging study. Her appointment there ran until 10:15, confirmed by the checkout paperwork I have at home. I pointed to the note. She could not have called your office at 8:52. She was in a radiology suite in the San Fernando Valley. Dr. Osei looked at the paper. He looked at his computer screen. He looked back at the paper. October 2nd. I continued. Helen was with me. We drove to Santa Barbara for the weekend. Her idea, she wanted to see the coast one more time. We left Friday morning and came back Sunday. I have the hotel receipt and the credit card record. She was not in Los Angeles on October 2nd. The room was quiet for a moment. Dr. Osei took off his reading glasses from his forehead and held them in one hand, turning them slowly between his fingers. His jaw had tightened in the way that careful men's jaws tighten when they are processing something they wish they did not have to process. "Mr. Brooks," he said slowly, "what you're describing would mean that someone else made those calls." "Yes," I said. "I'd like to know what number was used." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he turned back to his computer and navigated through several screens. I watched his face as he found what he was looking for. Something moved behind his eyes, a particular kind of stillness that I recognized from interview rooms, the stillness of a person absorbing an unwelcome fact. "The call log shows an incoming number for both cancellations," he said carefully. "It's the same number both times." I reached into my pocket again and placed a second piece of paper on his desk. On it, I had written Savannah's phone number, the number I had found in Helen's notes circled once in red ink with the words, "calls during treatment check," written beside it in Helen's handwriting. Dr. Osei looked at the number I had written. He looked at his screen. He set his glasses down on the desk with a small, precise click. He did not say anything right away. His hands were flat on the desk now, very still, and his breathing had changed slower, more deliberate, the breathing of a man choosing his words with exceptional care. "I'm not in a position to draw legal conclusions from what I'm looking at," he said finally. "But I can tell you that the number on my screen and the number you've written on that paper are the same number." "I'm not asking you to draw conclusions," I said. "I'm asking you to make sure that nothing in this record is altered or deleted, that the call log is preserved exactly as it is." He looked at me steadily. "I can do that," he said. "I will do that." A pause. "Mr. Brooks, are you going to be all right?" The question caught me somewhere I wasn't expecting. My throat tightened instantly the way it had been doing in unguarded moments since the morning at the kitchen counter with the 2 coffee cups. I pressed the feeling back down before it could get traction. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I'm working on it." He nodded slowly in the way that people nod when the honest answer is the only one they can respect. I thanked him and stood. We shook hands again, his grip was firm, his palm warm, and I walked out through the waiting room and down the corridor to the elevator bank. The parking structure at Cedars-Sinai is 6 levels open on the sides with views of the city spreading west toward the ocean. I got to my car on level 3 and sat down in the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. The sounds of the city traffic, a distant siren. The mechanical hum of the structure's ventilation came through the windows as a kind of ambient noise that had nothing to do with anything. I put both hands on the steering wheel. August 14th, October 2nd. The 2 appointments that had been canceled, the ones that Dr. O.C. had told me in the careful language of a man who had not wanted to say it directly, had come at the moments when Helen's treatment protocol needed the most aggressive intervention. The weeks where falling behind on the schedule would have the greatest consequence. Someone had called his office from Savannah's phone number. Someone had used Helen's name. I sat in the car for a long time, long enough for the light to shift and the level below me to cycle through 2 rounds of departing vehicles. My hands stayed on the wheel. I was not capable of moving yet, and I had learned enough about myself over 62 years to know when to stop trying to force a moment to end before it was ready. When I finally started the engine and pulled out of the structure onto surface streets heading west toward the marina, I had not cried, I had not fallen apart, but something in my chest had settled into a new position, lower and harder and very, very cold. The investigation now had a different weight to it than it had the day before. I was back at the boat shed by 4 in the afternoon. Frank had left another brown bag outside the door, a turkey sandwich this time, an orange, a bag of pretzels. I ate the sandwich standing at the table, looking at the diagram I had built over the past 4 days. The pencil lines connecting Kyle Calloway to Preston Calloway to Savannah to Terrence's company had dried into something that looked permanent, now fixed and inevitable the way a diagnosis looks once it's been written down. I added 2 new entries in the margin. August 14th appointment canceled. Caller S, C phone, and below it, October 2nd same. I stared at those 2 lines for a long time. Then I covered them with my hand because I couldn't look at them anymore. At 9 that evening, my phone rang. The name on the screen was Terrence. I sat down in the chair, straightened my back, and took 3 slow breaths the way I used to before walking into a difficult interview. Then I answered. His face filled the small screen. The first thing I noticed was how different he looked from the last time I had seen him, standing in the doorway of the Pasadena house. He had lost weight not dramatically, but enough that his face looked slightly hollowed, the angles sharper. The shadows beneath his cheekbones deeper than they should have been at 38. He was sitting at his office desk in Culver City. Behind him, I could see the whiteboard he used for engineering diagrams covered in equations and flowcharts and a corkboard with printed specifications pinned to it. A cold cup of coffee sat at his elbow, the kind that had been forgotten rather than finished. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the single syllable, and he pressed his fist briefly against his mouth before he could continue. "Dad, I've been trying to figure out how to call you for 3 days." "I know," I said. I kept my voice steady. "I'm here now. I don't even know where to start." He ran both hands through his hair, gripping the back of his head elbows, out the posture of a man whose thoughts are moving faster than his ability to organize them. "The company is hemorrhaging money, Dad. I've been going through the books myself because I don't trust the numbers Savannah keeps giving me, and I hate that I feel that way. I hate it because she's been working herself to the bone trying to help me keep this thing afloat. Terrence. And the vendors are calling every morning. The equipment lease is 2 payments behind. And I had a meeting with Preston Calloway's people last week, and they said the timeline on the patent transfer has to move up. They said there are regulatory windows, and if we don't move by the end of the month... Terrence. I said it more firmly this time. He stopped. His hands dropped from his head. He looked at the camera with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted and frightened in a way I had not seen since he was 7 years old and had woken from a nightmare and come padding down the hallway to our bedroom door. "Take a breath," I said. "Just breathe for a second." He breathed. His chest rose and fell. His jaw was tight. "Tell me what's happening with the patent transfer," I said carefully. "Savannah says it's the only way to save the company. He said it like a man who has repeated the sentence so many times it has worn grooves into him. She says if we partner with Callaway Capital, Preston's fund takes on the debt, the company gets restructured, and I stay on as lead engineer. She says it's a good deal. She says I should trust her. He looked down at the desk for a moment. When he looked back up, something had shifted in his face, a crack in the certainty thin and new. But she can't explain to me why the equipment accounts are short. She says it's cash flow timing. She says the consulting fees are standard for a company at this stage. She says I'm too deep in the technical side to understand the business structure. His voice tightened. I designed every component of that device, Dad. I built the prototype on a workbench in your garage. And now she's telling me I don't understand my own company. I gripped the edge of the table with my free hand. My knuckles ached from the pressure. The things I knew, the shell companies, the $900,000, the canceled appointments, the number on Dr. Osei's screen, were sitting in my chest like stones. And every word Terrence spoke added another one. I could have told him, right then. I could have said, "Son, I'm sitting in a boat shed your mother rented before she died. I know what's been done to you. I know who did it, and I can prove most of it, and I'm working on the rest." But I thought about what Helen had written in her notes. Don't let Terrence know until he can no longer deny it. And I thought about what I had seen in Terrence's face just now. The crack, the doubt, the terrifying fragility of a man whose trust in the person closest to him was beginning to come apart at the seams. If I told him now before the case was complete, he would go to Savannah. He would confront her with half the picture, and she would close every door I hadn't yet opened. "Have you signed anything new in the past 2 weeks?" I asked. He frowned at the question. "There were some documents last week. Savannah said they were standard authorization forms for the restructuring. Did you read them?" A pause, shorter than it should have been. She walked me through the key points. Terrence. I waited until he was looking directly at the camera. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to not sign anything else until you have read every single page yourself. Every page. Not a summary, not a walkthrough, every word." He blinked. "Dad, what?" "I'm not saying there's a problem," I said, which was the closest I had come to a lie in 62 years, and it tasted like one. "I'm saying your mother used to tell me that the most important documents are always the ones people ask you to trust rather than read. She was right about most things." I paused. She was right about everything, actually. Something moved across Terrence's face at the mention of Helen. His lower lip pressed hard against the upper one. His eyes went bright and wet at the outer corners, and he blinked twice fast the way a person does when they are determined not to cry on a video call. "I miss her so much, Dad," he said. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Every time something goes wrong with the company, the first thing I want to do is call her. And then I remember, I can't." My throat locked up completely. The stones in my chest shifted and pressed. I breathed through it. "I know," I said. "Me too. Every single day." He nodded. He wiped the corner of one eye with the back of his hand quickly, like he was hoping I wouldn't notice. Then he cleared his throat and straightened slightly in his chair, reassembling himself the way people do after letting something real show for a moment. "Are you okay, Dad? Where are you staying?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm somewhere safe. Don't worry about me." "I'm always going to worry about you." He said it simply without performance. "You're my father." "And you're my son," I said. "Which is why I need you to trust me when I tell you read every page. Don't sign anything until you do. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, okay, I can do that." "Good." I looked at his face on the screen, the shadows under his eyes, the hollowed cheeks, the whiteboard of equations behind him that represented 10 years of his life. "You built something real, Terrence. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His throat moved. "Thanks, Dad." We said goodbye and I ended the call. I set the phone face down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the wood fingers spread. The boat shed was quiet around me, just the sound of the water against the dock outside the low creak of the structure, settling the distant noise of the marina. I picked up Helen's notes and found the line I had been thinking about since the drive back from Cedars-Sinai. "Don't let Terrence know until he can no longer deny it." I read it twice. Then I put it back down, stood up, and went back to work. Before I tell you what Walter did next, and trust me, this is where everything begins to shift, drop a "still here" in the comments so I know you're with me. Every comment means more than you know. A quick note, the story continuing from here contains some fictionalized details, woven in for educational purposes. If that's not something you'd like to continue with no hard feelings, you're welcome to step away anytime. But if you're staying, you won't regret it. I took the bus to Century City. This was a deliberate choice. A man who arrives at a private investment bank in a 12-year-old sedan from Pasadena is a man people feel comfortable dismissing. A man who arrives on the bus in a cardigan and orthopedic shoes carrying nothing but a manila folder and a calm expression is a man people feel comfortable ignoring entirely. In 30 years of federal work, I had learned that being ignored and being underestimated are two of the most useful conditions a person can be in. Pacific Fidelity Bank occupied the lower 6 floors of a glass tower on Avenue of the Stars, the kind of building that announces its own importance through the quality of its lobby marble and the temperature of its air conditioning. I pushed through the revolving door at 9:15 in the morning and felt the cold hit me like a wall. The lobby was busy with the particular purposeful energy of people who believe their time is worth more than other people's time. Men in suits moving between elevators, women with expensive briefcases, and the practiced walk of people who have been taught that confidence is a performance. A security desk staffed by a young man in a blazer who looked up from his computer screen registered my cardigan and my age and looked back down. I walked to the reception desk. The woman behind it was in her late 20s, hair pulled back precisely a headset around her neck. She looked up with a professional smile that did not reach her eyes. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to speak with your director of commercial credit," I said. "I believe his name is Richard Marsh." The smile adjusted slightly, still professional, now also faintly patronizing. "Mr. Marsh handles our institutional and high net worth accounts. Do you have an appointment?" "I don't," I said, "but I think he'll want to hear what I have to say." She tilted her head the way people do when they are about to explain something to someone they've decided isn't going to understand it. "Sir, Mr. Marsh's calendar is managed through our executive scheduling system. If you'd like, I can give you the number for—" I reached into the manila folder and took out 2 documents. I set them on the counter facing her. The first was a UCC filing the one David Mercer had pulled, showing Preston Calloway's $5 million loan secured against the Brooks Medical Technologies patent. The second was a 1-page summary Michael Grant had prepared the previous evening, outlining the specific discrepancies between the authorized signatories listed in the company's articles of incorporation and the names appearing on the loan collateral agreement. This bank is currently holding a commercial loan secured against an asset that was pledged by someone who did not have the legal authority to pledge it, I said, keeping my voice the same temperature as the lobby air conditioning. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, your institution has both the right and the regulatory obligation to pause processing on transactions where there is credible evidence of fraud. I am providing that evidence right now at this counter in writing. I placed a third document on top of the first 2, my retirement identification from the Office of the Inspector General, Department of Justice, which said retired in red letters across the top, but still carried 30 years of credibility in the institutional weight of its seal. I spent 30 years investigating exactly this kind of transaction. I am not currently operating in any official capacity, but I have a practicing attorney named Michael Grant on the phone. I held up my cell phone, where Michael had been on a live call for the past 4 minutes, who is prepared to discuss the legal specifics with Mr. Marsh's team right now. The receptionist looked at the documents. She looked at the phone. She looked at the retirement credential. The professional smile had stopped performing entirely. She picked up her desk phone without another word. Richard Marsh appeared 11 minutes later. He was a compact man in his late 40s, silver at the temples, the kind of tan that comes from weekend golf rather than outdoor work. He walked toward me with the expression of a man who had been interrupted during something important and wanted me to know it. "Mr. he started. "Brooks," I said. "Walter Brooks, thank you for coming down." He looked at the documents on the counter, then at me, the cardigan, the orthopedic shoes, the manila folder. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. Then he picked up the UCC filing and read the first page. Something changed in his face. Not dramatically, Marsh was too practiced for that. But the interruption energy drained out of him and was replaced by something more careful. "Why don't you come upstairs?" he said, We sat in a conference room on the fourth floor, with a view of the Century City Shopping Center and the hills behind it. Michael Grant was on speakerphone at the center of the table. Marsh had brought a young woman with him who turned out to be the bank's in-house counsel, and she sat with a legal pad and said very little and wrote down a great deal. I walked them through it methodically, the way I had been trained to present evidence, starting with the facts that were verifiable from public records and building toward the conclusions those facts supported, the UCC filing, the patent transfer agreement, and the signatures it bore against the authorized officers listed in the corporate charter, the 18 months of payments to 3 shell companies controlled by Kyle Calloway Preston's brother, the timeline of the loan closing relative to the dates of the fraudulent transfers from the operating account. I did not editorialize. I did not use words like criminal or fraud. Out loud, I let the documents carry those implications themselves, which is always more effective than saying them. I had learned that from an assistant U.S. attorney in 2003, who told me a document that implies something will hold up in court. A witness who says it out loud in a conference room just gives the other side something to attack. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Marsh looked at his in-house counsel. She looked at her legal pad. "Michael," Marsh said toward the speakerphone, "can you speak to the standing of the collateral agreement under California Corporations Code SPAO, Section 313? Michael said without hesitation. An officer executing a contract on behalf of a corporation must have either express board authorization or apparent authority established by consistent prior practice. Neither condition was met here. The agreement is voidable at the corporation's election, and because the loan was extended based on that agreement, the bank's security interest in the collateral is at minimum subject to serious challenge." Marsh's jaw tightened. He looked at the documents in front of him. "How long have you been building this?" 18 days, I said. He looked up. Whatever he had expected me to say, it wasn't that. 18 days. "My wife built it for 14 months before that," I said. "I'm finishing what she started." The in-house counsel stopped writing and looked at me over her legal pad. It was the first time she had looked directly at me since we sat down. Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened in his chair, pulled the UCC filing toward him, and said to his counsel, "Get compliance on the phone. I want a voluntary hold on all transactions related to the Callaway Capital Loan account and the Brooks Medical Collateral Agreement, effective immediately." He looked at me. "We will not be contacting Mr. Callaway to inform him of the hold. Is that what you need?" "That's exactly what I need," I said. I stood up, gathered my documents, thanked Marsh and his counsel, and took the elevator back to the lobby. The security guard at the desk looked up as I crossed toward the revolving door. This time, he held the look for a second longer. I walked out into the Century City sunshine and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the folder under my arm, the city moving around me. Somewhere across town, Preston Callaway was planning a gala. Somewhere in Culver City, Savannah was preparing documents she believed were already in motion. Neither of them knew that the account those documents depended on had just been frozen. I found the bus stop on Avenue of the Stars and sat down on the bench to wait. An older woman beside me was reading a paperback novel with a bright cover. A teenager across the street was eating a breakfast burrito from a paper bag. The city went about its business around me, indifferent and enormous and entirely unaware. I put the folder on my lap and looked at my hands. Steady. Just like always. Michael Grant called me at 6 a.m. on the 19th day. I was already awake. I had been awake since 4, sitting at the table in the boat shed, with a cup of coffee Frank had left outside the door the evening before reheated in the small microwave someone, Helen I assumed, had installed in the corner at some point during the 14 months she had been coming here. The coffee was bad. I drank it anyway. I had been running on bad coffee and 4 hours of sleep a night for most of my adult professional life, and the body remembers what it's been trained to do. "I'm ready," Michael said. No greeting, no preamble. In the 3 weeks since I had first called him from this same shed, he had changed. The caution was still there. It was part of his character built in not going anywhere, but underneath it, something had solidified. He sounded like a man who had made a decision and was done reconsidering it. "Tell me," I said. "I filed the motion for a temporary restraining order at the Spring Street Courthouse at 8 o'clock last night," he said. "Emergency civil application assigned to Judge Patricia Owens in Department 47. She's been on the bench for 19 years. She reads every page herself. I've appeared before her 3 times. and she has never once signed something she hadn't personally reviewed. A pause. She signed it this morning at 5:42. I set down the coffee cup. The order does two things, Michael continued. First, it enjoins any transfer assignment or further encumbrance of the cardiac support device patent registered to Brooks Medical Technologies pending full verification of the authorized signatory chain. Second, it requires Pacific Fidelity Bank to produce all documentation related to the Callaway Capital loan within 72 hours, and prohibits the bank from releasing any funds associated with that loan until the court lifts the order. He paused again. Preston Callaway cannot move that patent. He cannot draw on that loan. He cannot do anything with either until a judge says otherwise. Outside, I could hear the marina beginning to wake up, the sound of boat engines warming up somewhere down the dock, the creak of wood under shifting weight, a gull calling once and then going quiet. Savannah doesn't know, I said. Not unless Preston told her, and I don't think Preston knows yet either. The bank is under the court order. Now they're not permitted to notify the borrower until service is completed, which won't happen until Monday at the earliest. He cleared his throat. The gala is Friday. Yes, I said. Walter, his voice shifted slightly. They're going to stand up in front of a room full of investors and announce a transaction that a federal court has already frozen. When that becomes apparent, and it will become apparent in that room in real time, it's going to be very bad for them. I know, I said. That's the plan. That's the plan. There was a pause on the line that was not uncomfortable. It was the pause of two people who have arrived at the same understanding through different routes and don't need to say so out loud. There's one more thing, Michael said. The hotel. I called the Pendry's event management office yesterday and spoke to their director of operations. I explained that the court had issued a TRO connected to a transaction that is scheduled to be publicly announced at their venue on Friday evening, and that there was a possibility law enforcement would need to present official documentation to the assembled guests during the event. He paused. I asked whether the hotel's AV system could be made available for that purpose on short notice in the event that a court officer needed to display official documents. They consulted their legal team and called me back within 2 hours. And they agreed. They have no interest in being the location where a federally enjoined transaction gets announced to investors. Their counsel was very clear about that. A slight dryness entered his voice. Apparently, the Pendry's reputation matters to them considerably more than Preston Callaway's gala. I almost smiled. Almost. Rita Voss, I said. She's the economics and business reporter at the LA Times. She's been covering the tech investment sector for 6 years. Preston's office sent her a press invitation to the gala. I found the email in Helen's records he had been cultivating her as a favorable contact. I had thought about this carefully over the past 2 days. A public event required a public record, and there was no better public record than a reporter who had been invited by the subject himself. I want her to know that something significant may happen Friday evening, not what specifically, just that it would be worth attending. You want a journalist in the room. I want the right journalist in the room, I said. Someone Preston invited himself. Someone who can report what she witnessed rather than what she was told. Michael considered this. I can reach out to her through the Times general press line, frame it as a tip from a source with knowledge of the event. Nothing specific. Nothing that compromises the legal proceeding, I said. Just enough that she doesn't leave early. Understood, he paused. Walter, how are you holding up? The question caught me the same way Dr. Ozzy's had, in the unguarded space between one thing and the next. I looked around the boat shed. The 12 cardboard boxes, 6 of them emptied and restacked against the wall, their contents transferred to the organized binders I had built over 18 days. The diagram on the table, its pencil lines now inked over in ballpoint so they wouldn't smudge. The laptop with Helen's video still in the playback history. I'm doing what needs to be done, I said. Helen started this. I'm finishing it. She would be... Michael started, then stopped himself, cleared his throat. She would be glad you found the place, he said finally. She called me once, you know, about 8 months ago. Before she called and asked me if something happened to her, would I be willing to help you if you needed it? She didn't explain why. She just asked. My chest tightened so sharply I had to put my hand flat on the table to steady myself. 8 months ago. Helen had been planning this for longer than I had known. What did you tell her? I asked. I said yes, Michael said simply. She was Helen Brooks. What else was I going to say? I did not answer that. I could not write at that moment. Instead, I looked at the diagram on the table, the whole elaborate architecture of what Savannah and Preston had built, and what Helen had mapped, and what I had spent 18 days turning from a collection of documents into something that could walk into a courtroom and stand up. Friday, I said. Friday, Michael confirmed. I ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I stood up, rolled up my sleeves, and spent the rest of the day making sure everything was exactly where it needed to be. 2 days. The gala was in 2 days. And somewhere in Santa Monica, in a condominium purchased with Terrence's money, James and Barbara Cole were probably sitting down to breakfast, without any idea that the world their daughter had built for them was about to come apart at every seam. And somewhere in a boat shed at the end of Dock 7 in Marina del Rey, a 62-year-old retired federal investigator was drinking bad reheated coffee and making sure that when it did, there would be nowhere left to run. I made one mistake in 21 days. On the first morning at the boat shed, before I had fully shifted into operational thinking, I had driven Frank's loaner bicycle to a convenience store 2 blocks from the marina and bought coffee and a breakfast sandwich and a bottle of water. And I had paid with my regular Visa card out of habit because my cash was in the bottom of one of the suitcases, and I hadn't wanted to dig for it. It was a $7 purchase. I had forgotten about it within the hour. I was reminded of it on the afternoon of the 21st day when a white SUV I didn't recognize pulled slowly down the access road toward Dock 7 and parked at the edge of the lot. I was at the table when I heard the tires on the gravel. I stood up and looked through the small window. The SUV was a late-model Cadillac Escalade, the kind of vehicle that costs more than most people's first homes. The driver's door opened and Savannah stepped out. She was dressed simply, dark jeans, a cream-colored blouse, her hair down. No jewelry beyond small gold earrings. She looked nothing like the woman who had sat at my kitchen table with a leather portfolio and the careful posture of someone managing a transaction. She looked deliberately like a daughter-in-law coming to check on her father-in-law. Soft, approachable, concerned. I had been expecting something, not this specifically, but something. In 21 days of digging through her financial architecture, I had developed a clear sense of how Savannah Cole Brooks operated. She did not leave loose ends. She did not leave people unaccounted for. And a man who had walked out of the house without signing her documents and then disappeared from her radar entirely was, by her calculation, a loose end that needed to be tied. She had found me through a $7 convenience store purchase made 3 weeks ago. I stood in the boat shed and accepted that as the cost of one moment of inattention, and I made a note to myself that I would not make a second one. I checked the pen on the table. The small device, no larger than a standard Bic with a concealed microphone built into the barrel, and a 12-hour battery had been purchased from an electronics supplier in Torrance 2 weeks earlier, paid for in cash. It recorded audio only with directional sensitivity, strong enough to capture a conversation, clearly across a table. I had consulted with Michael about it before buying it. He had been clear California Penal Code Section 632 required all parties to consent to recording of confidential communications. But courts had consistently held that a participant in a face-to-face conversation, recording that conversation in a private space they controlled, was not subject to the two-party restriction in the same way as wiretapping. The shed was leased in Helen's name, transferred to mine. I was the leaseholder. I was a participant in any conversation that took place here. The recording would hold. I set the pen on the table where it would be visible without being conspicuous, positioned the microphone end toward the chair where a visitor would sit, and pressed the small button on the side that activated the recording function. No light, no sound, nothing to see. Just a pen on a table. I sat down in my own chair and waited. She knocked. I told her to come in. Savannah stepped through the door and stopped taking in the room, the boxes, the table, the diagram. Something moved across her face very quickly that she got under control in less than a second. But I had been watching faces in small rooms for 30 years, and I saw it, recognition, and behind the recognition, the first hairline crack of alarm. She recovered smoothly. She looked at me with an expression of careful warmth and said, "Walter, I'm so glad I found you. I've been worried." "Savannah," I said, "sit down." She sat in the chair across the table directly in front of the pen. She folded her hands and looked at me with the expression of a person who has practiced compassion in a mirror. "Terrence doesn't know I'm here," she said. "I came on my own because I felt like you and I needed to talk, without him in the middle." She glanced around the shed with an expression of gentle concern. "Walter, you can't stay here. This place, it's not right for you. You shouldn't be living in a storage shed. Whatever you think is happening, we can work through it together." "That's kind of you," I said. She reached into the bag she had set on her knee and produced a folder. She laid it on the table between us and opened it with the careful, unhurried movements of someone who has done this before. "I had our attorney prepare something," she said. "It's straightforward. It clarifies your relationship to the company assets and the house, and it confirms that you understand the current arrangements. Once you sign, I can get you set up somewhere comfortable, something much better than this." I picked up the folder and looked at the first page. It was, as she said, straightforward. It was also, as I had expected, a comprehensive waiver of every legal claim I had against the Pasadena property, Helen's estate assets, and any financial interest in Brooks Medical Technologies. Buried in Section 4, in the particular dense language that lawyers use when they want something to disappear into the text, was a clause agreeing that I had no objection to the appointment of a conservator to manage my financial affairs in the event that 2 licensed physicians certified my cognitive incapacity. I turned the pages slowly the way a person turns pages when they are reading carefully rather than performing carefulness. "Take your time," Savannah said. Her voice was warm, patient, entirely controlled. I set the folder down. I looked at the pen on the table. Then I looked at her. "Can I get my reading glasses?" I said. "They're in my bag." "Of course," she said. I made a show of getting up, slowly moving to my bag in the corner, searching through it with the slightly fumbling movements of an older man whose hands aren't quite as reliable as they used to be. I found a pair of reading glasses I had bought at a drugstore 2 weeks ago for this specific purpose and put them on. I sat back down. I picked up the folder again. I looked at the conservatorship clause through the drugstore glasses and let my brow furrow slightly. "I need a little more time with this," I said. "Some of the language is hard to follow." The warmth in Savannah's face thinned at the edges, just slightly. Walter, the attorney, explained everything. "It's really a formality." "I'm sure it is," I said. "I just want to read it." The thinning increased. She unfolded her hands and refolded them in the other direction. "Walter, I want to be honest with you. The gala is Friday. After that, things are going to move very quickly, and if you're not in a settled situation before that happens, it becomes much harder for everyone to protect your interests." She paused. "Including Terrence." "What happens to Terrence if I don't sign?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment, reassessing, recalibrating the slight shift of a person deciding to change approaches. "Let me be direct," she said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone now cleanly and completely, like a light being switched off. "If you don't sign this, and you continue to interfere with the company's operations, Terrence loses the patent deal and the company goes under, and you—" She stopped, restarted. "You don't have the capacity to manage your own affairs, Walter. Everyone can see that. You've been living in a boat shed for 3 weeks. A judge would sign a conservatorship order in about 5 minutes if I presented a physician's evaluation alongside your current living situation." She sat forward slightly. "I'm offering you a clean exit. Don't make this hard." I looked at her. I felt nothing that resembled surprise. I felt something more like the particular stillness of a man watching a proof complete itself, the final variable resolving into the form he had always known it would take. "Why are you afraid of an old man who doesn't understand business?" I asked. Something flashed in her eyes. Contempt, I thought, or something adjacent to it. "I'm not afraid of you, Walter. I feel sorry for you. You don't have your wife anymore. You don't have your house. You don't have your son standing beside you." She stood up and picked up her bag, leaving the folder on the table. "You have nothing left. Sign the papers or don't, but don't mistake my patience for weakness." She walked to the door, opened it, and left without looking back. I sat at the table and listened to the sound of the Escalade starting up and reversing out of the gravel lot. I listened until the engine sound faded entirely, and there was nothing left but the water and the birds and the low creak of the dock. Then I looked at the pen on the table. Still on the table exactly where I had placed it, still recording every word she had said. I picked it up carefully and held it in my palm. "You have nothing left." I looked around the boat shed at the 12 boxes at the diagram, with its inked lines at the laptop, with Helen's face still in the playback history at the hard drive from Carol Simmons, sitting in its place on the corner of the table, at the folder from Dr. Osie's office tucked into the binder marked medical. I set the pen down gently and reached for my phone to call Michael. She had no idea what Helen had left me. I called Michael from the boat shed at 4:30 in the afternoon, 20 minutes after the sound of Savannah's Escalade had faded off the access road. "She came," I said, a pause, and she said everything she needed to say. I looked at the pen on the table still in my hand. The recording is clean. She identified herself. She presented the documents and she made the conservatorship threat explicitly, unprompted, in her own words. I heard Michael exhale, not relief exactly, but the particular breath of a man who has been holding tension in his body for a long time and has just been given permission to release a fraction of it. How explicit. She said, and I'm quoting directly, that a judge would sign a conservatorship order in approximately 5 minutes if she presented a physician's evaluation alongside my current living situation. I set the pen down. She told me I had nothing left. She told me not to mistake her patience for weakness. She said that on camera. She said that on camera. Another pause. Then quietly, "Walter, that's everything?" "Almost," I said. "Let's make sure the rest is in order before we use the word everything." I spent the next hour going through the complete evidence package with Michael on speakerphone. We had built it over 22 days from a boat shed in Marina del Rey, using public records, a retired accountant's backup drive, hospital call, logs, a pen camera, and 14 months of careful work by a woman who had known she was running out of time and had refused to waste a single day of what remained to her. The package contained an order, the pen camera recording of Savannah's visit, time-stamped and geolocated to the leased property, the external hard drive from Carol Simmons containing 3 months of original ledgers showing the reclassification requests, Carol's refusal emails, and her termination notice, the public record documentation David Mercer had compiled, the California Secretary of State registrations for all 3 shell companies, the UCC filing showing Preston's fraudulent loan, the LA County property records showing the Cole family's cash purchase in Santa Monica, the call log documentation from Dr. Ozzy's office showing the 2 cancellation calls made from Savannah's phone number on dates when Helen was demonstrably elsewhere, Michael's own records as company counsel, including the board meeting minutes that showed no authorized vote for the patent transfer, and the summary legal analysis Michael had prepared, citing the specific federal statutes that the evidence supported. Wire fraud, 18 U.S. Code 1343, the use of electronic communications to execute a scheme to defraud. Bank fraud, 18 U.S. Code 1344. Obtaining money from a financial institution by means of false representations, specifically Preston's $5 million loan secured against an asset he did not legally control. Money laundering, 18 U.S. Code 1956. The concealment of criminally derived proceeds through the shell company payment structure, forgery of a financial instrument, 18 U.S. Code 513. The fabrication of Walter's signature on the mortgage modification agreement. When I finished reading through the list, Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to call the FBI field office on Wilshire first thing tomorrow morning. I'll request an urgent meeting with the Financial Crimes Unit." "I want to be there," I said. "I know, I'll arrange it." He paused. "Walter, once we hand this over, it moves at the government's pace. We won't control the timeline anymore." "I know that too," I said. "But the gala is Friday. If the FBI wants to have agents present Friday, is the deadline." "I'll make that clear," he said. "Financial crimes agents have worked event-based intercepts before. If the case is as strong as it looks on paper, and it is, they'll want to be in that room." We ended the call. I spent the rest of the afternoon making 3 complete copies of the evidence package, 1 for Michael, 1 for the FBI one, sealed in a waterproof envelope that I slid into the space behind the steel filing cabinet where Helen had stored her earliest documents. Insurance. The kind of insurance you buy when you have spent 30 years watching careful plans come undone by a single misfiled copy. Frank knocked on the door at 6 with a paper bag. A burger this time, fries, a bottle of Gatorade. He set it down outside without knocking the way he always did. I opened the door before he could walk away. "Frank," I said. He turned. He was wearing the same flannel shirt he had worn the first day, or one exactly like it. He looked at me with the expression he always had, unhurried, present, asking nothing. "I want you to know," I said, "that what Helen asked you to do, Keeping this place finding me, not telling Terrence, it mattered more than I can explain to you. Frank was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the water at the last of the evening light lying flat and orange on the surface of the marina. Then he looked back at me. She told me once that she wasn't sure you'd know what to do with what she left you, he said. I told her I had a feeling you'd figure it out. He nodded once slowly. Looks like she was worrying for nothing. I felt something move in my chest that I hadn't felt in 22 days. Not grief, something warmer than grief, and quieter. Thank you, I said. He picked up the paper bag and handed it to me. Eat something, he said. You look like you've lost 15 pounds. He walked back down the dock, his boots steady on the worn wood, his shoulders unhurried. I stood in the doorway and watched him go, and then I went inside and sat down and ate the burger, which was from the In-N-Out 2 miles up the road, and was, despite everything, extremely good. The following morning, I put on my least worn shirt, took the bus to the FBI Los Angeles field office on Wilshire Boulevard, and sat across a conference table from 2 financial crimes agents for 3 hours and 40 minutes. The lead agent was a woman named Special Agent Torres. She was in her early 40s, methodical and precise, with a particular quality of attention that the best federal investigators have, the kind that makes you feel she is hearing not just what you are saying, but the shape of what you are not saying. She went through the evidence package page by page, asking questions that told me she had already formed a working theory and was testing it against the material in front of her. At the end of 3 hours and 40 minutes, she closed the folder and looked at me across the table. Mr. Brooks, she said, were you in the OIG? 30 years, I said. I retired 4 years ago? She nodded in the way that people nod when something they suspected has been confirmed. The gala is tomorrow evening. It is, I said. We'll be there, she said. I thanked her, shook her hand, and walked out of the building into the late morning sunshine on Wilshire Boulevard. The city was doing what it always does, moving in different, enormous, full of people who had no idea what was happening in the lives of the people standing next to them on the sidewalk. I found a bench at a bus stop, half a block east, and sat down to wait. Tomorrow was Friday. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the photograph I had been carrying since the boat shed, the one of Helen at the beach in Santa Monica, taken before the diagnosis. Before any of this, the one where she was laughing at something out of frame and her eyes were completely unguarded. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put it back in my pocket, stood up when the bus came, and went back to the marina to get some sleep. Before I reveal what happened at that gala, before Savannah and Preston walked into a room, they would never walk out of the same way. Leave a ready in the comments. I want to know you're still here for this. One more thing worth saying. Portions of this story include fictional elements added to bring the deeper truth to life. Names and places are coincidental, but what this story is about, that part, is as human as it gets. The Pendry Hotel on Sunset Strip looked nothing like a boat shed in Marina del Rey. That was, I suppose, the entire point. I arrived at 7:45 minutes after the doors opened, when the crowd had settled into its rhythms and the room was full enough that one more older man in a dark suit would not register as anything worth noting. I had taken a cab from the marina rather than the bus. Some occasions require a different kind of invisibility, and arriving by taxi at a West Hollywood hotel in the evening is far less conspicuous than arriving on public transit. The suit I was wearing was the one I kept for funerals and depositions. Navy single-breasted, purchased 11 years ago from a department store in Pasadena, and maintained with the kind of care that makes a modest thing last. Helen had pressed it for me the last time I wore it to a colleague's retirement dinner 2 years ago. I had not thought about that until I put it on, and then I had thought about it for a long time. The grand ballroom was on the 2nd floor. I took the stairs rather than the elevator, another old habit, another calculation about where attention goes and where it doesn't. The room was extraordinary in the way that rooms designed to impress are extraordinary. Chandelier, light linen tablecloths, the murmur of several hundred conversations happening simultaneously. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with practiced precision, carrying trays of champagne flutes and small plates of food that cost more per piece than Frank's weekly grocery run. At the far end, a stage had been set with a podium and a large screen behind it, currently displaying the Callaway Capital Ventures logo in blue and gold. I found a seat at a table near the back against the wall, beside a column that gave me a partial view of the entire room without requiring me to be particularly visible from the stage. An older woman to my left introduced herself as the wife of a cardiologist from Brentwood. I shook her hand and told her my name was Walter, and that I was there in connection with the medical device being presented. Both of those things were true. I scanned the room. Preston Calloway was near the stage working the crowd with the fluency of a man who had been doing this his entire adult life, moving from cluster to cluster, laughing at precisely the right moments, touching elbows and shoulders with the practiced warmth of someone who has learned that physical contact deployed correctly creates the sensation of intimacy without requiring any of its substance. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him the way expensive things fit people who have always had expensive things. Savannah was at a table in the second row, wearing a silver dress that caught the chandelier light every time she moved. She was talking to a woman. I didn't recognize her posture perfect. Her smile engaged her champagne glass, held at exactly the angle that signals ease without suggesting excess. She looked like she had won something which, as of 24 hours ago, she still believed she had. Terrence was standing at the edge of the stage off to the right, holding a glass of water rather than champagne. He was wearing the dark suit he saved for important occasions, and his face had the strained, slightly dazed quality of a man who has been told tonight is a celebration without being entirely sure what is being celebrated. He kept glancing at the room with the expression of someone waiting for a translation. I did not let him see me. Not yet. 4 tables to my left, a woman with dark hair and a press badge clipped to her jacket was working through what looked like her second glass of water, her eyes moving around the room with the systematic attention of someone whose job is to notice things. Rita Voss. I recognized her from the headshot above her byline in the Times business section. Preston had sent her a personal invitation. She had come prepared to work. Good. The program started at 8. A woman from the event coordination team welcomed the guests with remarks about innovation and the future of cardiac medicine. 2 physicians spoke briefly about the clinical significance of the device Terrence had spent 10 years building in his parents' garage and then in a rented laboratory in Culver City. I watched Terrence's face during those remarks. He was listening intently, and something in his expression during those 2 speeches was the closest thing to the man I knew, alert present, genuinely moved by the clinical implications of what he had made. Then Preston Calloway took the stage. He was good. I will give him that. He spoke with the conviction of a man who believes his own narrative so completely that the belief itself becomes a kind of evidence. He talked about vision and partnership and the responsibility of capital to enable genius. He talked about Terrence with the particular vocabulary of someone who has practiced reducing a person's life's work to a footnote while making it sound like a tribute. Terrence, he said, would continue to contribute his extraordinary technical expertise to the next phase of development. Terrence would remain a valued member of the team. I watched Terrence's face change during those sentences. The alertness became something else, a slight frown, a glance at Savannah, who was watching Preston, with the focused attention of someone following a script. The frown deepened. Preston reached the podium and gestured to his right, where an assistant was already moving toward the stage with a leather portfolio containing the investment agreements. The investors at the front tables were shifting forward in their seats. Somewhere to my left, I heard the sound of Rita Voss's pen moving across a notepad. Preston smiled at the room, the full, assured smile of a man about to close the most significant deal of his career. Behind the stage, the large screen went dark. The room noticed immediately. 200 conversations didn't stop at once. They tapered one cluster at a time into something that became, within about 4 seconds, complete quiet. Preston looked over his shoulder at the screen. The assistant with the portfolio stopped walking. The screen came back on. It was not the Callaway Capital Ventures logo. The screen behind the stage filled with text. Not a logo, not a presentation slide. Plain black text on a white background, the way official documents look when someone wants them to be read rather than admired. At the top, in a font large enough to be legible from the back of the room, were the words Superior Court of the State of California, County of Los Angeles. And below that, in slightly smaller text, Temporary Restraining Order, Case Number 24-CV-08847. In the matter of Brooks Medical Technologies' patent assignment, the room took about 3 seconds to understand what it was looking at. I watched the comprehension move through the crowd, the way a wave moves through water, starting at the front tables closest to the screen, where people leaned forward and squinted, then spreading backward as the people behind them followed their gaze and their faces changed. Preston Calloway turned around slowly. He looked at the screen. He looked at the portfolio in his assistant's hands. He looked back at the screen. His face went through several expressions in rapid sequence: confusion, then recognition, then something that was not quite fear but was in the same neighborhood. "What is this?" he said. He said it to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone. His voice was still controlled, still carrying the residual authority of a man who had just been speaking into a microphone, but the edges of it had developed a tremor that had not been there 30 seconds ago. Michael Grant appeared from the side of the room. He walked to the edge of the stage with the unhurried purpose of a man who had prepared for this moment carefully and had no intention of rushing it. He was carrying a folder, and he addressed the room rather than Preston directly. "My name is Michael Grant," he said. "I'm the attorney of record for Brooks Medical Technologies. The order on the screen was issued by Judge Patricia Owens at the Los Angeles Superior Court at 5:42 yesterday morning. It enjoins any transfer assignment or encumbrance of the cardiac support device, patent pending verification of the authorized signatory chain." He paused to let that land. "In addition, Pacific Fidelity Bank has placed a voluntary hold on all transactions related to the Callaway Capital Loan account, effective as of 2 days ago, based on evidence that the collateral used to secure that loan was pledged without proper legal authority." The room had gone completely quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when several hundred people simultaneously stop doing what they were doing and focus on a single point. Preston moved first. He stepped away from the podium and walked directly to Savannah's table, covering the distance in about 4 strides. And when he got there, he leaned down and said something to her in a low, urgent voice. I was too far back to hear the words, but I didn't need to. I could read it in the angle of his body and the set of his jaw and the way Savannah's expression shifted from startled to defensive in the space of a single breath. She stood up. "I provided everything you asked for," she said. Her voice was low, but not low enough the room had gone quiet enough that it carried. "Every document, every signature. You told me the legal structure was your responsibility. You told me he had authorized the transfer." Preston's voice had climbed several degrees. The corporate composure was cracking in real time, the way expensive things crack when subjected to force they were not built to withstand. "You told me Terrence had signed off on everything." "He did sign." Her chin came up. "You designed the transaction. You told me what documents to get and when to get them. I was following your instructions." "That is not what happened." "That is exactly what happened, Preston." Terrence had not moved from his position at the edge of the stage. He was standing very still, holding his glass of water in both hands, watching his wife and the man he had been told was his business partner argue about who had told whom what in front of 200 investors, physicians, and journalists. His face had gone through several expressions and had landed on something that was not anger and not grief, but the particular blank devastation of a person watching their own life be narrated by strangers. Michael approached him and held out a document. Terrence took it with one hand mechanically and looked down at it. It was a copy of the signature authorization records, the ones showing that the signatory on the patent transfer agreement did not match any officer listed in the company's articles of incorporation as having authority to execute that class of transaction. Terrence read it. His jaw tightened. He read it again. He looked up at Savannah. She had stopped arguing with Preston. She was looking at Terrence now, and something had shifted in her face, the defensiveness replaced by a calculation that was almost visible, the particular recalibration of a person assessing which direction the danger is now coming from. "Terrence," she said. Her voice had changed softer now, reaching for the register she used when she needed something from him. "Baby, listen to me. This is not what it looks like. Your father has been—" "Don't." The word came out of Terrence quietly, but with a force that stopped her mid-sentence. His hands were shaking around the glass of water, a fine tremor barely visible, the tremor of a man holding himself together through the specific application of will. "Don't tell me what it looks like." He set the glass down on the nearest table. He looked at the document in his hand. He looked at the screen where the TRO was still displayed in plain black text for the entire room to read. He looked at his wife. "How long?" he said. Savannah opened her mouth, closed it. "How long, Savannah?" She didn't answer. The silence that followed was not comfortable or ambiguous. It was the silence of a question that has already been answered by everything surrounding it. From 4 tables to my left, I heard the sound of Rita Voss writing very quickly. Preston tried to walk toward the exit at the left side of the room. He made it about 6 steps before 2 people in dark blazers, who had been standing near the doors, stepped forward and positioned themselves in his path without making a scene of it. They said something to him that I couldn't hear. He said something back. They said something else. Preston's shoulders dropped by approximately 2 inches. He didn't go anywhere. I stood up from my table. I walked toward the stage the same way I had walked into every difficult room in 30 years of federal service. Slowly, without hurry, without performance. There is a particular kind of authority that belongs to people who do not need the room to know they have it. I had learned this early in my career from an assistant U.S. attorney named Margaret Holt, who told me before my first major courtroom appearance, Walter, the moment you rush, you've told them you're afraid of running out of time. Take your time. Let the room come to you. I had been taking my time for 22 days. I could take a little more. People moved aside as I walked through the crowd, not because they recognized me, but because there is something in the movement of a person who knows exactly where he is going that causes other people to step back instinctively. I reached the front of the room and stopped about 15 feet from where Savannah was standing. She saw me. Her eyes found mine across the space between us, and for a moment, just a moment, the calculating intelligence that drove everything she did simply stopped working. Her mouth opened slightly. Her champagne glass tilted in her hand, and she caught it barely. Then the calculation came back online. When this man, she said, raising her voice so the room could hear, turning slightly toward the nearest cluster of investors, is my father-in-law. He has been experiencing significant cognitive decline since the death of his wife. He's been living alone in a storage facility for 3 weeks, and he is not well. Her voice was steady-pitched at the exact register of a concerned family member making a painful public disclosure. I don't know how he got in here, but someone needs to call. Savannah, I said. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The room was quiet enough that it carried without effort, and there was something in the way. I said her name, no anger in it, no satisfaction, just the flat certainty of a statement that has already been proven that stopped her mid-sentence. I'd like to play something for the room, I said. If you don't mind? She stared at me. Her jaw was tight and her free hand had closed into a fist at her side, and her chest was rising and falling faster than it had been 30 seconds ago. But she did not say no. I think some part of her, the part that had spent years calculating risks and outcomes, understood that saying no in front of this particular audience would cost her more than staying quiet. Michael was beside me. He had a laptop open connected to the room's sound system through the same arrangement he had made with the hotel's event management team 2 days earlier. He looked at me. I nodded. Savannah's voice came through the ballroom speakers. If you don't sign this, Terrence loses the company. And you will be placed under guardianship. You no longer have the capacity to manage your own affairs. The words were clear and clean, the recording quality better than I had expected from the pen device. The room heard every syllable. You don't have your wife anymore. You don't have your house. You don't have your son standing beside you. You have nothing left. The silence that followed was different from the silence that had followed the TRO on the screen. That silence had been the silence of confusion. This one was the silence of comprehension, the particular quiet of a room full of people who have just understood something they cannot ununderstand. Savannah's face had gone the color of the white tablecloths. Her champagne glass was now shaking visibly in her hand, the liquid moving in small, urgent waves, and she set it down on the nearest table with a sound that was too loud in the quiet room. Her eyes were wide and fixed on me with an expression I recognized not from anything she had done in the past 3 weeks, but from interview rooms, from the faces of people who had just realized that the ground they thought was solid had been hollow the entire time. That recording, she said. Her voice had lost its shape. That's not legal. You had no right. The recording was made at a property I lease. I said, during a conversation in which I was a direct participant. I consulted with an attorney before making it. California case law supports its admissibility. I kept my voice level. You're welcome to challenge it in court. Michael stepped forward and held up 3 documents, the shell company registrations, the UCC filing, the bank records. He said 3 sentences, $927,000. 3 companies, 1 brother, 1 fraudulent loan. A condominium in Santa Monica, purchased with cash that had never belonged to the people who spent it. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The document said everything that needed to be said, and the room understood them. Preston had stopped trying to leave. He was standing near the wall with two of Agent Torres's colleagues positioned on either side of him, not touching him, not restraining him, simply present in a way that made departure impractical. His tuxedo still fit him perfectly. His face looked like something had been removed from behind it. Savannah turned to Terrence. "Baby." Her voice cracked on the word, the first uncontrolled thing she had said all evening. She moved toward him, her hand reaching out. "Terrence, please, I need you to listen to me. Everything I did because I was trying to save the company. I was trying to save us. If you would just let me explain." Terrence stepped back. Not dramatically, just one step, a small, precise movement that put 12 more inches of space between them. His face was very still. His eyes were dry. The tremor in his hands from earlier was gone, replaced by the stillness of a man who has moved past the shaking into something quieter and more permanent. "I've been listening to you for 5 years," he said. "I think I'm done." Savannah's hand dropped. Her breath caught audibly. Her eyes filled whether with genuine feeling or with the reflex of a person reaching for their most reliable tool, I couldn't say. And it didn't matter anymore. Special Agent Torres came in through the main doors with 2 other agents. She crossed the room, without rushing, showed her credentials to no one in particular, and stopped beside Michael Grant. They exchanged a few words. She looked at the documentation he was holding, then looked at Preston, then looked at Savannah. She said something to the agent nearest Preston. He produced a card from his jacket pocket and handed it to Preston with a quiet word that I couldn't hear, but knew the general shape of something about cooperation and the next 24 hours and the importance of not taking any international flights. Preston took the card. His hand was steady, which surprised me slightly. Some people are steadier in catastrophe than they are in normal life, because catastrophe finally matches the tension they have been carrying inside all along. A temporary restraining order is a civil court instrument, not a criminal arrest warrant. The agents in that room had the authority to prevent Preston from leaving the country and to ensure the evidence was preserved, but the arrest warrants would come later after the U.S. Attorney's Office reviewed the case file. That was how the process worked. It was slower than it looked in movies. It was also considerably more permanent. Rita Voss had moved from her table to a standing position near the side wall, and she was writing without looking at her notebook, her eyes moving between Preston Savannah and the screen where the TRO was still displayed. She was going to have a very good story for tomorrow's business section. I turned to find Terrence. He was standing exactly where I had last seen him, at the edge of the stage alone, now that Savannah had moved away. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in a very long time, not since he was a boy. And the expression was the one that means I don't know what just happened, but I think you did something, and I think I need to understand it, and I think I'm going to cry, and I'm very angry about that. I walked toward him. "Dad," he said. His voice broke on the word the same way it had broken on it 22 days ago when he called me on video, except that this time we were standing in the same room, and I could actually reach him. "Dad, how long have you—" "Not here," I said quietly. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Not yet. There's one more thing." He looked at me. His eyes were bright and wet, and he was pressing his lips together very hard. "One more thing," I said again. "And then I'll tell you everything." I looked at Michael across the room and nodded once. Michael reached for the laptop. Helen appeared on the screen. The same blue cardigan. The same flat fluorescent light. The same table in the same boat shed where I had sat alone 3 weeks ago and heard her voice for the first time since the funeral. But this time, 200 people were watching. The room had already been quiet. It became something beyond quiet, the specific stillness of a large space full of people who have stopped breathing at the same moment, every small sound suspended, every movement arrested. Helen looked directly at the camera. Her face was pale, and her hair was thin, and she was clearly not well, and none of that diminished her. If anything, it did the opposite. "Terrence," she said. Terrence made a sound beside me, not a word, just a sound low and broken, the sound of a man whose chest has just been opened by a single syllable spoken by someone he will never hear speak again. "If you're watching this," Helen said, "things probably went further than I hoped, but I want you to know that I'm not angry, I'm not afraid, and I'm not asking you to be either. She paused the way she always paused when she was choosing words carefully. I know you loved her. I know you trusted her. That's not a weakness, Terrence. That's who you are, and I never wanted you to be any different. Another pause. But I need you to look at the truth now, not for me, for yourself. Because you built something extraordinary and it belongs to you, and nobody gets to take that from you. She looked at the camera for a moment, without speaking. Not a dramatic pause, just the quiet of a woman who has said what she came to say, and is taking a moment before the last of it. Take care of your father, she said, and take care of yourself. I love you both more than I know how to say. The screen went dark. Terrence was crying. Not quietly, not the controlled, held-back tears of a man trying to maintain composure in a public room. He was crying the way people cry when they have been holding something for too long and the container finally gives way, his shoulders shaking his breath, coming in ragged pulls, one hand pressed hard over his mouth, as if he could keep the grief contained through physical pressure, and had already understood that he could not. I put my arm around him. He turned into it the way he used to when he was small, and I held my son in the middle of the Pendry Hotel ballroom, while 200 people who had come to witness a business transaction witnessed something else entirely. After a while, I don't know how long the shaking slowed. His breathing steadied. He straightened slightly, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and turned to look at Savannah. She was standing 8 feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her silver dress no longer catching the light, the way it had at the beginning of the evening. She was looking at Terrence with an expression I had not seen on her face before, not calculation, not warmth, not the controlled performance of either. Just a woman looking at the consequences of her own choices and finding them larger than she had anticipated. Terrence reached up and removed his wedding ring. He held it for a moment in his palm, looking at it. Then he set it on the table beside him with a small final sound. "Don't call me," he said. "Don't come to the office. Don't contact my father." His voice was rough from crying, but it was steady. "We're done." Outside the main doors of the ballroom, in the carpeted corridor that led back to the hotel lobby, Special Agent Torres had positioned herself near the elevator bank. Beside her stood a man I recognized from the one time I had met him years ago at a company holiday party, James Cole, Savannah's father. He was a tall man, in his mid-60s, silver-haired, wearing a sport coat that suggested he had come directly from somewhere else. He was not under arrest. He was standing with the careful, cooperative posture of a man who has made a decision to get ahead of something rather than be caught behind it. His attorney was beside him, a woman in a dark suit who was speaking quietly to Agent Torres. I walked out to the corridor and stopped, and James Cole looked at me. His face carried something I hadn't expected, not defiance, not the two-fingered handshake from the wedding. Something older and heavier. Regret, maybe. Though I've been wrong about that kind of thing before. "Mr. Brooks," he said. "Mr. Cole," I said. He looked down at the carpet for a moment, then back up. "I didn't know all of it," he said. "I want you to know that. I didn't ask the questions I should have asked, but I didn't know all of it." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the Santa Monica condominium. I thought about Helen driving alone to a boat shed in Marina del Rey, carrying boxes of documents while her body was failing. I thought about August 14th and October 2nd. "I believe you," I said. "That's going to matter." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an absolution. It was a statement of fact that cooperation has value, that the distinction between knowing and not asking is real, even if it isn't comfortable, and that a judge would likely see it the same way. James Cole nodded. He turned back to his attorney. Agent Torres caught my eye and gave me a small professional nod. I turned and walked back into the ballroom, back to where Terrence was standing back to the table, where a wedding ring sat on a white linen cloth. 8 months passed. Federal cases move the way large ships move slowly with enormous weight and without the ability to stop quickly once they are in motion. And then I was back in a courtroom on Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles, in a wooden bench that had held 1,000 other people before me, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly older than they were. Judge Patricia Owens delivered the sentences on a Tuesday morning in July. Savannah received 9 years in federal custody, forgery of a financial instrument, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, an elder abuse enhancement under California Welfare and Institutions Code applied to the conduct involving Helen's medical appointments, the 2 phone calls made from her number on days when Helen was demonstrably somewhere else. Her attorney argued for leniency on the grounds of the personal hardship. Judge Owens listened to the argument the way she listened to everything completely without interruption and without being moved by it. Preston received 11 years. Wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. His attorney argued he had been misled. The judge noted without particular emphasis that the evidence suggested a more active involvement. James and Barbara Cole were not charged. They surrendered the Santa Monica condominium under civil asset forfeiture proceedings. James Cole had cooperated fully as he said he would. That had mattered, as I said it would. Terrence sat beside me in the gallery for both sentencings. He did not cry. He had done his crying in private slowly over 8 months of therapy and long phone calls and the particular grief of a person who has spent years building a life around someone they thought they knew. What he looked like in that courtroom was not happy, but it was something more durable than happy. After the second sentencing, we walked out of the Spring Street courthouse together into July sunshine that hit us both like a clean flat hand. Terrence stopped on the steps and put his hand on my arm. "I owe you an apology," he said, "that I don't have the right words for yet." "You don't need words yet," I said. "You need time." He nodded, his throat worked. "We're naming the first production line after Mom," he said. "Carol Simmons is back as CFO. Michael he's been everything." A real smile crossed his face, brief and slightly broken at the edges. "Mom would have hated having something named after her." "Completely," I said. He laughed. One short, genuine laugh, the first I had heard from him in 8 months. Then he hugged me once quickly, the way men hug when they are still figuring out how, and walked down toward his car. I watched him go. Then I turned, found the bus stop on Spring Street, and sat down in the July heat to wait. I took the photograph of Helen from my jacket pocket, the one from Santa Monica. Before the diagnosis, her eyes completely unguarded, laughing at something out of frame, and I held it for a while without looking away. The bus came. I put the photograph away. I got on and went home. The pepper trees in the front yard had grown. The garden was coming back, not all at once, not dramatically, just steadily the way things grow when nobody is watching them perform. I went inside, made 1 cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and drank it slowly while the morning light came through the window above the sink. Then I got my jacket and went outside to tend the garden. I've been sitting with this family story for a long time, trying to find the right words. Here is what I know: family betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who know exactly where you keep your trust and choose to use it against you. I made mistakes. I waited too long. I let grief blind me when I should have been paying attention. If someone in your life is asking you to sign things you haven't read, give up your home, or step aside from everything you've built, don't do what I did. Don't wait. I believe, and I've prayed enough quiet mornings to mean this, that God places the right people beside us at the right moment. Helen found Frank, Frank found me. Nothing about that was accidental. Every family story has a wound somewhere in it, but a wound is not the ending. What you do after is the ending. Family betrayal leaves scars, but so does surviving it. And surviving it honestly with your eyes open is worth something. If this story touched you, drop a comment below and tell me yours. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to the channel, there are more stories coming. Thank you for watching until the very end. The stories on this channel may contain fictionalized elements crafted to reflect deeper human truths. If this type of content isn't for you, we respect that completely. Another video might serve you better. But if you're still here, we're honored.